variety of sensory experiences. So we have three panel speakers here. The first one is Chris Doyen. His presentation is Temporal Distortion Through Sensory Manipulation, Bruce Nauman Anthro, Socio Through the Lens of Roland Barthes, punctum. Chris Doyen is a PhD candidate in history of art at the University of Bristol, with research interests including modern and postmodern sculpture, phenomenology, and semiotics. His doctoral thesis analyzes Bruce Nauman's video installation through the lens of philosopher Roland Barthes' theories. His most recent article, Recontextualizing Roland Barthes Through Bruce Nauman's Video Installations and Antonin Artaud's Theater of Cruelty, was published earlier this year in Culture, Theory and Critique. He was also a recipient of the 2024 Norman Levin Research Grant, which enabled him to travel to Hong Kong to attend Nauman's exhibition at the Tai Kwun Contemporary Museum. So let's welcome Chris.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Doyen, and I'm a PhD candidate in art history here at the University of Bristol. The title of my talk today is Temporal Distortion Through Sensory Manipulation, Bruce Nauman's Anthro Socio Through the Lens of Roland Barthes' Punctum. American artist Bruce Nauman employs various tactics to attack viewers in the museum or gallery space. Some viewers have the feeling of immediately wanting to leave a Nauman exhibit. Nauman's earliest stated goal of art making was already tinged with a sense of violence. Quote, to try to make art that was just there all at once, like getting hit in the face with a baseball bat, or better, like getting hit in the back of the neck. You never see it coming, it just knocks you down, end quote. The focus of my research then was prompted by an attempt to explain the spectator's experience in Nauman's installations, breaking down the mechanisms of the artworks as a way of accounting for the intense reactions of audiences, who oftentimes are at a loss to describe the artworks, let alone the experience of being in the space of the installation. Born in 1941, Nauman is still making art. He has been credited as a pioneer of installation art, conceptual art, and video art, among others. Although Nauman created his Anthro Socio video piece, the subject of today's talk, in the 1990s, as an artist, he really cut his teeth in the 1960s. Some artwork in America in the late 60s and 70s embodied a revolt against the rigidity of Greenbergian formalism and abstract expressionism, as well as a revolt against the austerity of minimalism. Many California artists, including Nauman, unbeholden to the expectations of galleries or the agenda of the New York School, were free to experiment across mediums. A sense of rebelliousness is a constant thread running throughout Nauman's oeuvre. I thought it would be useful here at the outset to quote another one of Nauman's thoughts on art making. He has said, quote, I know there are a lot of artists who function in relation to beauty, who try to make beautiful things. They are moved by beautiful things and they see that as their role to provide or make beautiful things for other people. I don't work that way. Part of it has to do with an idea of beauty. Sunsets, flowers, landscapes, these kinds of things don't move me to do anything. I just want to leave them alone. My work comes out of being frustrated about the human condition and about how people refuse to understand other people and about how people can be cruel to each other. It's not that I think I can change that, but it's just a frustrating part of human history, end quote. In terms of aesthetics, then, the audience's expectations of what they might see and feel during the traditional viewing experience of art may be irreverently upended here. My methodology adopts a phenomenological stance combined with a semiotic framework to analyze Naumann's videos. My research takes French philosopher Roland Barthes' theories and uses them as a lens to show how Naumann's two-dimensional video work functions like three-dimensional sculptures. My dissertation focuses on 4 main video artworks. I show how Barth's third meaning becomes performative in Naumann's clown torture. I illustrate how Naumann's contrapposto studies achieves Barth's concept of the neutral. This is from 2015. I focus on Naumann's 3D videos and holograms. This is from 2022, his holograms from the 60s, asserting that they achieve Barth's answer of the 5th type. And today I'll cover Anthro Socio in relation to Barth's punctum. My dissertation thesis is that Naumann expands sculptural aesthetics through mechanisms of his two-dimensional video works that evoke three-dimensional form. This via an expansion of Barthian semiotics. And then today you can see in this clip, this image of Anthro Socio. He actually paired it with one of his sculptures, which is Carousel. Regarding this connection to sculpture, first, of course, the Anthro Socio artwork qualifies as a sculptural installation. Next, we know that Naumann conceived of the two-dimensional heads in the Anthro Socio video in light of three-dimensional sculptures he has made. Another important point to note is the spinning of the head in the video provides the audience with multiple viewpoints, evoking the experience of walking around a three-dimensional sculpture in the round. Further, the mechanisms of Naumann's sculptural installations have their roots in minimalist sculpture. Works whose imposing presence shifted much of the focus from the object itself onto the viewer's bodily presence and experience in the exhibition space. So here we have a work from 1965 that's pretty common of his work in graduate school, that it's fairly minimalist. And then you can see a few years later, a work like Going Around the Corner piece has this minimalist cube, but now he's incorporated video. And this is actually surveillance video of the audience going around that. Regarding his installation art in general, Naumann states, quote, "It's not a sculpture that you're walking around or looking at. You're in the middle of it and you're part of it," end quote. So I wanted to go ahead and show the Anthro Socio video. I thought I would just show about a minute of it. And I'm focusing on sound for today. So I wanted to see if we could raise the volume a little bit near the end of the video without bothering the audience too much. So we'll see how it goes. So I wanted to raise the volume at the end there just to get a sense of what it would be like in the space. And I mentioned I didn't want to try to bother the audience, but then again, I think that's what he's going for that in a way. So in my talk today, I'll first introduce the new term sonic punctum in relation to Anthro Socio as a way to explain the effect of sound on viewers. Second, because time and death figure prominently in Barthes's notions of the punctum, I examine the concept of temporality. I conclude with brief mention of a few concepts that I intend to explore more deeply in the dissertation chapter on this artwork, namely phenomenology, abstraction, and entropy. This is a little early, this slide. But first, it will be necessary to define Barthes's notion of the punctum as presented in his book, Camera Lucida. And this is one of the images that he uses. The concept of the studium, on one hand, for Barthes, involves the more ordinary aspects of a photograph that do not particularly stand out. This in contrast to what he refers to as the punctum, which is some detail in the image that catches our attention, perhaps in terms of being odd or seemingly out of context. Barthes suggests that, quote, this second element will disturb the studium, that it will break or punctuate the studium, end quote. Further on, Barthes writes, quote, a photograph's punctum is that accident which pricks me, but also bruises me, is poignant to me, end quote. He also refers to it as something that stings the viewer. It is a wound. Crucial here is that, in my opinion, the punctum connotes a sense of violence. Although Barthes applied his theory of the third meaning and the punctum solely to film stills and photographs, respectively, a unique line of argument in the present analysis is that in Nauman's work, the looping of the short videos essentially renders the moving image static, allowing for application of Barthes' theories. On a side note, this one iteration of this work also is in photograph form. The present analysis represents the first of its kind in applying the concept of the punctum to video. Here, rather than the punctum being a particularly odd detail of a photograph, I contend that in Nauman's installations, the punctum instead involves sound and video image. Commissioned by then senior curator Robert Storr for the Dislocations exhibition in 1991 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Anthro Socio rind-facing camera is the first iteration of this, features footage of the performance artist Rind Eckhart staring straight at viewers as he bellows, quote, feed me, eat me, anthropology, help me, hurt me, sociology. Those were the phrases that we heard in that video. The new term sonic punctum is reflective of the oral assault of the loud volume in Nauman's Anthro Socio, the excruciating sound enough to wound viewers. Although closing one's eyes may guard against the power of an object or image we see, escaping the pervasiveness of sound proves more difficult. The phrases uttered by Rind are already cryptic in nature, and attempts at decoding their meaning become hampered by this oral onslaught. Adding to this mania, the audio of each of the monitors in Anthro Socio comes across deliberately set out of sync. It's something that Nauman is known for. In his book, The Sculptural Imagination, renowned art historian Alex Potts, who spoke at the University of Bristol earlier this year, analyzed Anthro Socio and remarked on its, quote, confrontational aggression, end quote, adding, quote, at the same time, the work has a loud in-your-face quality that blocks the possibility of release into contemplative repose, end quote. Penetrating the body, the prick of this punctum is powerful enough to stop viewers in their tracks. The result is that this liminal state occupied by the deathly disembodied heads on the walls becomes actualized in the experience of the viewers. This point provides us a segue into our next area of exploration involving death in relation to time. The mechanisms of Nauman's installation videos in effect paralyze the viewer's perception of time. In a book titled The Science of Sound, Thomas Rossing et al. Report that, quote, noise appears to interfere with the ability to judge the passage of time, end quote. Nauman affects a deliberate disruption of narrative time through repetition, resulting in a kind of perpetual present. And at this point, what I did is I cropped the video. So I wanted to play a short clip of it, and then I set it on loop, and I wanted to play it without sound at this time. So hopefully this works. In Barthes's analysis of the punctum in photography, of particular note is that he explicitly denies the applicability of the notion of the punctum to film, principally because of this aspect of temporality. He writes, quote, "I don't have time. In front of the screen, I am not free to shut my eyes. Otherwise, opening them again, I would not discover the same image," end quote. Once again, I contend that the brief looping of Anthro's Socio creates stasis in the moving image. Whereas the radical time of traditional film develops a fictional world into which the audience enters by way of the imagination, in contrast, the formal characteristics of Anthro Socio seem to purposefully impede this type of immersive experience. This freezing of the image also evokes the stasis of sculpture. While inside one of Nauman's video installations, the viewer may feel as if time is not moving forward, which may generate a kind of feeling of being stuck, provoking a kind of fight, flight, or freeze response in the body. Here, the viewer is immobilized, seemingly forced into the static solidity of figurative sculpture. Barthes presents a second punctum involving death. This second aspect tied up with the connection photographs have to time as a record of what once was, but what is no longer. Barthes refers to a person's likeness captured in a photograph at a particular time in the past as the, quote, "this has been," end quote. When any viewer looks at that photograph, the future of the person pictured inevitably comes to mind. The, quote, "this will be," end quote. The experience Barthes notes regarding his viewing of a photograph in this way evokes a sense of vertigo in him, is the term he uses. In terms of this melting together, to use Susan Sontag's phrase, of past, present, and future, Barthes confides that, quote, "the three tenses dizzy my consciousness," end quote. The term Barthes uses for this is equivalence, and it is precisely this aspect that fills him with horror, to use his term. This dizziness Barthes describes is indicative of the feeling of confusion experienced by viewers prompted by the formal mechanisms of Nauman's video that induce a suspension of time. In fact, there is not really an opening scene to the action in Anthro Socio, nor any conclusion for that matter. Past, present, and future condense into one time tense, and the audience's attempts at coming to terms with this unusual temporality may turn out to be quite challenging. To return to this image, only a few sentences into his explanation of this second type of punctum, Barthes provides a striking photograph of Louis Paine taken before his execution, his interest in the image lying in the elements of time and death. Regarding this photo, Barthes states that, quote, "the punctum is he is going to die," end quote. Another significant point is that Barthes claims that this second punctum can actually be found in all photographs of people, not just ones alluding to or physically portraying death. A second iteration of Nauman's artwork exists, this one titled Anthro Socio Rind Spinning. A few elements in particular of this second variation of the work relate to the concept of death. The severed heads, evocative of sculpted portrait busts mounted on plinths, grow more and more disturbing. Normally, of course, a severed head lacks animation, to put it mildly, whereas this one achieves a Barthian state of equivalence and somehow being both dead and alive. The blue lighting of the room, you can see, bathes the space in an otherworldly hue, intensifying the effect. Skewing things even further, some of the heads are inverted, such as the one on the left and the one on the monitor. And the large-scale display of the images, redolent of the monumentality of sculpture, also figures into the intense impact. Being surrounded by disembodied heads floating somewhere between the realm of the living and the dead can certainly be unnerving. Of particular note is Barthes' admission that, quote, "each photograph always contains this imperious sign of my future death," end quote. And I've added the emphasis there on the word my. The profundity of this point lies in the observation that the connotation of death inherent in any photograph has less to do with the person portrayed and more to do with the viewer's experience of the feeling of death while in the presence of the image. The brevity of today's talk prevents my exploring phenomenology, abstraction, and entropy in more depth. I'm interested in the effect of abstraction on the gallery space, I contend that the figure in Anthro Socio undergoes a cubist deconstruction, the multiple views coalescing into one single head that I assert generates a kind of virtual statue. Further, in that, negative space plays a huge role in Nauman's work. This is an early sculpture cast of the space underneath my chair, but he has others that deal with negative space. Entropy becomes a useful metaphor in terms of my assertion that the wide open space of the Anthro Socio exhibit feels paradoxically dense. In conclusion, in the midst of Nauman's work, our traditional experience of art is subverted. Barthes' concepts on the image offer a helpful framework to examine how a video piece like Anthro Socio functions in the space of the gallery. They also shed light on just how Nauman's two-dimensional video images reference the solidity of three-dimensional sculpture. Thank you.
I mean, that's a pretty powerful piece of work. I imagine, I think one might say you've been to see that work and experience the sound aspect of it.
I saw the contraposto studies, and then I saw another collection of his video works in Hong Kong that had sound where a colleague I was with felt the need to leave. So I've experienced the sound, but contacted two places to view Anthro Socio, and it's not on view right now. Clown Torture, one of the ones that I'm studying, I'll be seeing, it's at the Art Institute of Chicago. So I'll be seeing that in a few weeks.
But would you say that experience of the sound is essential to the experience of the space that surrounds the work of art, which is
I think it is essential in terms of the type of discomfort that Nauman is trying to get at, maybe to kind of shock viewers out of their maybe normal everyday mindset, kind of habitual mindset. So in Clown Torture, that's certainly an aspect of the discomfort is sound. And then also in contraposto studies, initially I didn't think it was it played too big of a part. The work is focused mainly on, I think, references to sculpture. But in the space, he had speakers set in the ceiling. They were kind of inconspicuous, and the audio was played in reverse. So the sounds were just indescribable, almost otherworldly, just completely different, and that was another aspect of it. So I think sound always plays into the formal aspects of the work. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit. Okay, thank you.
So let's move to our second panelist, Oluremi Abati.